speaker today is Dr. Richard Casaburi, and he is a PEP pioneer from day one, so he's been with us forever. He's from Los Angeles BioMed Research Institute at Harbor UCLA Medical Center in Torrance, and they have a beautiful new building. I've been there a couple times. And he's going to speak on potpourri of COPD. Thank you.
I don't feel like a visitor here. I feel like a resident. Jackie's right. I used to be young, and now I'm sort of the average age around here. That's scary as hell. I can tell you.
That's young.
That's young. We're all young. We're all young. No, I'm still young. The title, Potpourri of COPD, I thought that had a sort of potpourri of COPD, sort of chips off the tongue. But I thought maybe I'll talk about a couple of things before then. I had a question that I'll be glad to address, and I've got a study to push. Well, let me talk about the thing that was handed to me. Stem cells in COPD. Stem cells. Sorry. No. This I actually signed on to their website and read the material they had. Well, it's not inconceivable that these people have something that may be of some help. It's really not ready for prime time. When you have a therapy, the FDA reviews it and they approve it. They haven't done that. When you have a therapy, you publish the results in a journal where scientists sort of analyze the results and say, yeah, we think it's all right and we think these are correct results. They haven't done that. They have studies where they talk about people who have taken the therapies and then fill out quality of life, how they feel, and they say that they feel better. And that's not hard evidence. They don't have hard data showing that the lungs have improved and things like that. We, in fact, did a study on stem cells. Stem cells are a great idea. I mean, these little cells are little engines that would go around and sort of fix things and make things regrow. It's a great idea, and someday it may well be, it may in fact be good therapy. But there was a lot of enthusiasm 10 years ago or so that we, like next year, we'll have cures for everything, and it just hasn't worked out that way. Partly because these cells sort of sit around and you introduce them, okay, and they say, well, what do I do now? You have to tell them what to do. Go and fix the lung. All right, but how do you do that? How do you tell them to do that? We did a study over at LABioMed in my lab about 7 or 8 years ago. A company that had a good track record, had a good concept, had a good stuff that they believed would work, and we did a very well-controlled trial in people with COPD, and maybe some of you participated in that trial. And we did about, between several sites, we did about 80 or 90 people. And the good news is we didn't hurt anybody. Always a good thing. But the bad news is we didn't help anybody. We couldn't find any evidence that they really had helped. And I just don't think, I hate to rain on anybody's parade, I just don't think this group looks like they've really got to the point where people should go and do it. Notice no insurance covers it. Why not? Why wouldn't it be covered? Right. So they're asking to put money on the line, get this therapy. What they do is they take either fat tissue or blood or bone marrow or something like that out of you and sort of cook it up to it, jazzes it up and puts it back in you. So it probably wouldn't hurt, but it probably wouldn't help. So I'm sorry to do that. The second thing before I start is there's a study that we're involved in that I've seen a lot of people with little tubes in their nose that might be interested in participating. It's called Pelican. Pelican stands for something, but it's I'll get back in frame in a minute. You can pass them around, but it's even though Pelican stands for something, we put lots of pictures of pelicans. It's a study that's run out of the University of Illinois in Chicago, and it's trying to find whether there are strategies you can use to help people use their oxygen more. And the strategy is to have a phone line where people can call in and talk about it, or even have periodic calls to people to sort of encourage them to use their oxygen, answer their questions and things like that. And if it's demonstrated this sort of helps, well, that may become a standard, that you don't have a truck back up and drop off the oxygen and leave. You actually have people have an organized set of procedures. And this study involves not going any place. It's all home-based, and they'll give you calls every once in a while. They'll also try to figure out how much you're using your oxygen by asking you to read your oxygen meters and things like that. Last 3 months. It's not a big deal. I think they say they pay you, but don't pay you very much, so give you a couple bucks. But if you participate, it would be nice. I think that they're looking for 400 people. They've got about 250 already. My role is mainly to analyze the data they've got, rather than to actually, I'm not on the phone lines.
What is the goal?
The goal is to determine whether giving people access to information about oxygen when they have oxygen really helps them to use their oxygen more intelligently and for a longer period of time. That's the strategy. Now, frankly, this group here is a pretty well-educated group. I think we better do it only on people who are newly prescribed oxygen. But then they've decided to let all kinds of funny people in. So if you feel like again, Jackie was going to pass out brochure, the flyers, and there's a phone number to call. And they're nice people. If you do it, that'd be fine. Well, I'm being, I have a funny relationship with this group. I don't feel that I have to go and tailor my talks to you. I don't feel like I have to talk down to you. Partially because Jackie and the crew have educated you people, so you really know what's going on. And partly because I'm too lazy to come up with talks to give to patients. So this is a talk I gave about 2 weeks ago in Carmel, and that's a nice place to be, to the California Thoracic Society, on sort of what I thought was going on in COPD. I talked about COPD medications, the drugs you take, and I think we're all interested in those. And some insights we've obtained from the study called COPD Gene. I've been talking about this for a long time. It's a big ongoing study. I'll tell you a little bit about it later. But it's a really interesting finding that I thought you might enjoy hearing about. So, advances in medical treatments for stable COPD. This is not for when you're in the hospital and need therapy, but this is just what you take on a day-to-day basis. We have some government-funded studies by the National Institute of Health, industry studies, and then some newfangled stuff. No stem cells, but other newfangled stuff. In the NIH has been funding some big multi-center trials, and the one that we've been involved in is this thing called the COPD Clinical Research Network. Essentially funded 10 sites around the country to go to a pretty modest hotel near the Chicago airport every once in a while and try to figure out what would be a good study to do, what we dream up. And so far we've done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 studies, and I thought I'd show you the results of a couple of them just to show that your tax dollars are not going to waste. So this is the 2 studies that I'll talk about are ones that were aimed at trying to find out ways to reduce the frequency of COPD flare-ups. And that's a really nasty thing. You get sick, you end up in the hospital, or you end up in the doctor's office, you got to take stuff. And it would be nice to figure out ways of having people get sick less often. And who was just talking to me about antibiotics? That they don't. Yeah, Jackie says that doctors don't like prescribing antibiotics anymore. This is exactly the opposite of that. This is a study where we decided that giving people who were doing okay, but were getting sick every once in a while, we would give them antibiotics every day. Azithromycin, Z-Pax, Zithromax, yeah. Gave them that, a pill every day versus an active substance. And then followed them for a year to see how they did. A number of you participated. We recruited 99 people at Harbor UCLA, but 1,100 across the study. Ended up getting published in New England Journal of Medicine, which is the thing you aspire to. Big deal. Look, there's my name. Oh, look, I'm there. But wow. And in essence, the good news is that we found a difference This is the likelihood of not having an exacerbation, and more people on placebo got sick than people on azithromycin by 27%, which is not a cure, but that's pretty darn good. So, for people who are having trouble staying well, now your doctor might prescribe an antibiotic for a period of time, and that would be a good deal. The second study is the same sort of concept. We all take statins. I take statin, and I didn't die of a heart attack yet today, so I guess it's doing its job. But there was a theory that statins would prevent COPD exacerbations as well, COPD flare-ups. And again, we got it published in the New England Journal of Medicine. There's me. Again, who else is there? I guess nobody else you know. And simvastatin is well, the results here were different. Exactly the same number of people, but 2 lines for placebo and statin, the same number of people who got sick. So statins don't work. So, okay, 1 out of 2 isn't bad. So this is, again, how your tax dollars are being spent for COPD research on finding new therapies. We're doing another study, and this one I'll talk about for a minute. Know what a beta blocker is? You know what a beta agonist is? That's in your bronchodilators. Albuterol is a beta agonist. A beta blocker is sort of the opposite thing, but it's used for, heart doctors use it to control blood pressure. And there is some evidence that beta blockers may actually reduce COPD flare-ups as well. And let's see, what's the next slide say? It says that we used to think that beta blockers were a bad idea in COPD because we use beta agonists and bronchodilators. Well, why would you use the opposite? It's like they would fight each other. It turns out that's not true. And some database analysis has shown that exacerbations might be lower, COPD flare-ups might be lower in people who choose the beta blockers. So there's some scientific plausibility, but we got the study funded. A guy in Alabama named Mark Dransfield applied to, this is how these crazy things are, to the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense accepted an application to study beta blockers in people with COPD, and they funded it. So the Defense Department is funding this study, and we're going to take 1,000 people with COPD who have had COPD flare-ups in the past year and don't need beta blockers for sure because they have heart problems, and give them either a beta blocker or placebo, and then follow them for a year and see who gets sick more often. Sounds pretty straightforward. It's a lot of work. We're about to start this study, and my friend Jackie will help me to, when we start recruiting, hopefully some of you guys will come in and work with us. Okay, what other big multi-center trial? Okay, another drug, oxygen. I think oxygen's a drug. It's the best, most effective drug we have for COPD. It really works very, very well. For few side effects, it's a really fine drug. We tried to find out in a study whether the right number of people were receiving oxygen. Your doctor prescribed oxygen to some of you because your oxygen level was low. Well, how low? Well, there's a number, like 88% saturation. That's a good number. If it's lower than that, you get oxygen. If it's higher than that, you don't. Well, who decided on 88? It turns out our friend Tom Petty decided that. My mentor, Tom Petty, who used to be the president of, come to a lot of PEP meetings, decided that in the 1980s, but that number, he just pulled it out of the air. So this study is trying to figure out whether that number is really where we should draw the line. So we recruited a whole bunch of people who had oxygen levels a little bit better than that, not normal, but a little better than that, and then randomized them to get oxygen or not to get oxygen. And then saw who got sick, who died, compared that, and studied 700 and some odd. I have that somewhere. Here's the started the study in 2009, and here's the centers. Here's LABioMed, it's us, and Loma Linda helped us, and City of Hope helped us. And we recruited 762 patients. And we finished the study in 2014 and then finished collecting the data in September of 2015, and the results are, I can't tell you. They actually made us, I had to sign a piece of paper that said I could not tell what the results are until it's published. Because New England Journal of Medicine, where we're trying to get it published, or I think it will be published, say that we don't want anybody to know before it hits the press through us. So in order to do that, we submitted in December, and the results are under embargo. And again, I told Jackie, if you'd ask me back in the fall, I'll tell you. Or if you want to tie me down and torture me, I might tell you now.
Waterboard.
Okay.
Where's the rope?
All right.
And whatever the results are, it's actually going to make a difference, because if we show that oxygen does have benefits for people with less severe oxygen, a lot more people will receive oxygen. If they show that it doesn't, then there's going to be a lot of thought about it. People with borderline indications, or maybe you were sick for a while, your oxygen levels got a little bit better, well then maybe you don't need it. So there's going to be a lot of push and shove about this. We haven't had enough studies of oxygen for a therapy that's used a lot. So this is a good study, and I hope you'll enjoy the results that come out.
When's the anticipated publication?
I would guess in 2 months, something like that, maybe 2.5 months, 3 months, yeah, like that. And it will probably than I would use that sort of thing. It's a big study that a lot of effort's going into it. Well, our friends in industry, the pharmaceutical companies, are doing a whole bunch of stuff. They want to make money, but in the process, they end up providing us with stuff that we can use. And the big kerfuffle right now involves things that we're familiar with: bronchodilators and inhaled steroids. That's the most of the stuff that you take in the spritzers, right? Bronchodilators and the inhaled steroids. And the bronchodilators especially have really revolutionized COPD therapy. I remember very well that there was a time when we had no drugs that were really of any substantial use, and we really had no faith that they worked. And we might use them, but we didn't really think much of them. And these long-acting drugs came out around 2000, 2002. And we've sort of gotten used to using them, and we know that they don't, not cures, but they do help people feel better. And there's two kinds of bronchodilators we use. They're called long-acting beta agonists, and long-acting anticholinergics. And the ones that you know are salmeterol and formoterol. It's sort of a component of Advair kind of stuff for the beta agonists. The long-acting anticholinergics is tiotropium, Spiriva. So these are drugs that you're pretty familiar with, and we've been using them for a while, and we like them. But the point is that these two kinds of medications really have additive effects. And we've known that for a while. I pulled out this slide that I had from 2005, just to show that we've known this for a while. And here's it's formoterol as a beta agonist, tiotropium as an anticholinergic. And you see, this is the measure of how bad the airflow is. If it's up, it's good. And you give one of the drugs, you give the other of the drugs, and you get improvements, and over the next 12 hours things decline a little bit, and you get them another dose. But if you give them together, it's 1 + 1 = 2. So giving those drugs together really makes sense. And a lot of doctors have done that. I mean, you have two spritzers to give once, twice a day, once a day, yeah? And it makes sense that we do this. And so in this case, since we have the formoterol is a twice-a-day drug in tiotropium, it's a once-a-day drug, so you have to take 2 puffs of this, one in the morning, one at night, and 1 of these in the morning, and you're done. So for 3 puffs, you can do pretty well and get what I used to call Cadillac therapy for COPD. It's the best we can do. Maybe Mercedes therapy would be better. What's changing is that a whole bunch of other companies are getting into the mix to sort of capture this market. A lot of COPD patients out there. GlaxoSmithKline, Boehringer Ingelheim, Novartis, Actavis, AstraZeneca, Sanofi. These are all companies who are big pharma companies. And in a reasonable world, you take an existing beta agonist and an existing anticholinergic, and you put them in one inhaler and you'd be done with it. That's not how capitalism works. That's not how it works. So each company is going to come up with their own anticholinergic, their own beta agonist. So for instance, Boehringer Ingelheim, who had tiotropium, that's Spiriva, had to invent Olodaterol, a perfectly good beta agonist, and say, oh, we'll use this with this. And GlaxoSmithKline didn't have a once-a-day drug, so they invented Vilanterol and umeclidinium. Novartis invented Indicaterol and glycopyrronium. AstraZeneca, formoterol, which we've seen before, plus a newer drug, aclidinium. Formoterol plus glycopyrrolate. So this is all alphabet soup. But these are all drugs, and frankly, don't tell anybody I said so, but all of these are roughly equivalent. All of these are roughly equivalent. These you're taking twice a day, these you're taking once a day, and it's not, would you rather take once a day or twice a day?
Once a day.
Maybe once a day, but it's not a real big deal, guys. So the point is that when we get these combination products, and if they started coming out, they will in fact enable us to get by with 1 or 2 inhalations a day for this additive benefit. And there's going to be a lot of marketing, and in the end, I think most people will be taking a combination product because it's sort of a why not? Because no matter, one is never enough, so 2 is better, and 1 plus 1 equals 2. And I've got a bunch of slides here to show that these things actually work that way. Let me just try it. Here's one from the new Novartis product, I think. Here's the change in lung function. And if you take nothing, there you are. If you take one, you take the other, it goes up. That's a nice improvement. And then if you take both, you really appreciate more. And are these a lot, big changes or little changes? I'll give you a sort of a perspective. This is a 0.2, 0.4. If you do a 0.1 change, you can feel it. 0.1 liter is enough to make you say, yeah, that feels a little better. So we're talking about things that are 3 times that. So these are things that give, on average, people appreciable improvements. Here's a slide that shows that people will, what is this? This is baseline. This is how you're feeling, your quality of life, and down is good. You take one, you take the other, you take both, and you're getting a better response. And let me see, just what's this one? This is this is how short of breath you feel by some rating scale. Placebo, one, the other, and both. So this stuff works okay. So we're going to have those, and you're going to be happy to have them. These are going to be good drugs to have. And again, they're already around. Inhaled steroids are something else. So a lot of you probably take inhaled steroids as part of, usually along with a beta agonist. Advair and what's not formoterol, it's come on. Symbicort, yeah. Geez, how can I forget that? Symbicort and Advair are the 2 that are been around for a while. Brio is around now, which is a once-a-day version of inhaled steroids. But the question has become whether inhaled steroids are really necessary for everyone with COPD. And that's being, this is the slide I pulled up. So it's tug of war. And you know, it's being fought over my head, at least, by the pharmaceutical companies. One that sort of have this point of view and have that point of view. I just want to let you in on the questions that are being debated, because it may be that your doctor will come to you and say, you know, you're on inhaled steroids, but I don't think you need to be on them anymore. Or, I think you should go on inhaled steroids. I'll sort of tell you what I think about the advantages. So the question really is, the key question is whether inhaled steroids are important for most COPD patients, or maybe even all. I'm going to skip that slide and this slide. It turns out that the way doctors have practiced in recent years is to give inhaled steroids for almost all patients, even those who have, you know, they're doing okay, let's give them some inhaled steroids. And that is being questioned. It turns out that the reason why you give inhaled steroids is, well, let's see, I'm going to integrate this with my slide flow here. They're being widely prescribed, and the question is, should they be stepped down and eliminated in some people. And I think I'm going to talk this through. Okay, all right, I'm back on course now. So the question is, why would you want to give inhaled steroids and why would you not? The pro, why you would want to give them, is because people who take inhaled steroids get sick less often. And as we said, that's a good benefit. And big trials have been done to show that that, in fact, is true. By about 25%. You have somebody on no drugs at all, you put it, and they're getting flare-ups. You put them on inhaled steroids, they get about 25% less flare-ups. And that is a good thing, and it's a reasonable thing to do. And I've got a couple of slides here to show you that their clinical trials were done about 15 years ago to show that very well. There's this 25% reduction in the amount of flare-ups these people got. The second reason why you might want to give them is because lung function actually increases a little bit. Not like the changes we were seeing with the bronchodilators, but a little bit, probably because these things decrease swelling in the airways. And then on the swollen airway, actually you can breathe through it a little bit better. The con, well, the con is, in theory, well, here's the thing. Inhaled steroids for asthmatics, the other obstructive lung disease, are absolutely the thing to use. They help a lot. But in COPD, that may not be so, and it has to do with the kind of inflammation, different kinds of inflammation that exist. So the fact that it is a different kind of inflammation predicts they won't work quite as well. And a paper I have here sort of shows how you can change COPD patients, at least in theory, from those who don't respond to inhaled steroids to those who do. And that's an area that may, in fact, bear fruit, and eventually we may find ways of making inhaled steroids more effective. The other con is that in clinical trials, we haven't been able to show that inhaled steroids make the disease progress less rapidly. We're looking for that. We're trying to find ways of saving people's lives and having them get sick less, having them go downhill less rapidly. We've looked at studies with 6,000 people in it, haven't been able to detect that, so that's one strike. And the second is we haven't been able to find that it makes people live longer. So that's the strikes against inhaled steroids. And then there's the side effects of inhaled steroids. Now, again, to take another step back, we're very lucky with our COPD drugs, especially the inhaled ones. They have very little in the way of side effects. I mean, you think about a patient on cancer chemotherapy and their hair is falling out. Well, they got to do that, right? COPD, we don't have to deal with that sort of stuff. Our drugs have very good side effect profiles, but not none. And in fact, inhaled steroids, sometimes you get thrush, sort of little white stuff on your tongue, fungal infections in your tongue. They tend to give you osteoporosis, bone thinning, and adrenal suppression. But it's just a little bit because they really stay in the lungs. They do give you a little bit more in the way of pneumonia, because, and that's been sort of documented. Here's a study, and again, New England Journal of Medicine showed that the group that got inhaled steroids had about 90% pneumonias, and the group that didn't had about 12%. And that's probably because the inhaled steroids keep the body from fighting off bacteria in a certain way. You're sort of suppressing that, so pneumonias may exist. But you say, well, your flare-ups are decreasing, your flare-ups are decreasing a lot, and your pneumonias are decreasing a little bit. Maybe that's an okay thing. But the controversy goes like this. So the question is, if you have an inhaled steroid, if you're considering an inhaled steroid in somebody who is already on good bronchodilator therapy, which we know reduce exacerbations, it's flare-ups by themselves, will inhaled steroids provide an additional benefit? And in fact, the studies that have been shown to date show that maybe not. So maybe the good bronchodilators are enough, and the inhaled steroids don't help very much in addition. And I think that to cut to the chase is that what we're thinking now is that inhaled steroids should probably not be used in people who aren't having flare-ups. And a lot of people, even with pretty substantial COPD just don't seem to get sick. And those people probably don't need inhaled steroids. And those who do get sick every once in a while, we have to determine in the next couple of years whether the therapies we're using now, like those combination bronchodilators, are enough, and even for those people, inhaled steroids aren't really necessary. So that's where the push comes to shove now in the pulmonary world, where your pharmaceutical companies are going to come at you, and they go to the doctors and they try to push them to prescribe this new drug and that new drug. But this is where they're coming from. This is where your doctor may prescribe a little bit of a change as the story becomes clearer. Well, let me talk about a couple of, actually, I've got one more study that I thought was really a cool study. The Holy Grail, mortality reduction. We want to live longer, right? If you had a pill, Mrs. Jones, here's a pill. If you take it, you'll live longer, but maybe I won't give it to you. Well, you can't do that, right? So mortality reduction is the Holy Grail. And again, we have no medical therapies for COPD, no pills, no inhalers that we've shown have made people live longer. We've tried. There were 2 big trials done about 10 years ago. 4,000 to 6,000 people, randomizing people to the bronchodilators we know were good for people, but did they reduce overall mortality? Could not show it. The question is whether these new combination drugs, maybe they'll be successful in decreasing mortality. So, GlaxoSmithKline, big pharmaceutical company, said, we're going to take a chance. We're going to go and spend a lot of money on a study to try to figure out if this is so. And if it's so, then we'll have a study, we'll be able to advertise on TV and say, you want to live longer, Mrs. Jones? This is what you want. The study is called the Summit study, and it took people with a certain kind of, certain severity of COPD, this is sort of moderate COPD, and a history of heart disease, they thought that was important, and randomized them to their new product or its components versus placebo. And they studied 16,000 people. Wow. Imagine what that cost. 16,000 people in 43 countries. And they continued the study, the way the design went, they continued the study until 1,000 of those people had died. And then they opened the box to see who those people were who had died. Primary outcomes, mortality reduction. And this number of people studied was designed so that if there was 20% fewer people died in the group that received the drug, then they'd be able to tell it for sure. And what's drum roll, drum roll, drum roll, drum roll? It didn't work. It didn't work. They found, in fact, 12% fewer people died, but they couldn't tell that wasn't by chance alone. And so therefore, and therefore, the rest of those things they found are not going to be possible to determine. And there's a big X here. And the study hasn't been published yet, but it will be published. And I want to see how they'll wiggle and squirm, trying to make something positive out of this sadly negative study. So even these combination products don't seem to make people live longer. Too bad. Live better. Live better. Novel approaches, new drugs coming along. I see these things all these times, these figures with all these alphabet soup kind of things, all kinds of these what they call inflammatory mediators. Things that they, if you block this, maybe it'll make things better. Don't block that. Mm-hmm. There's a study of a drug called benralizumab. Benralizumab. I bet you thought I couldn't say that. Benralizumab. It's a AstraZeneca drug, and they're studying it to see if in a certain kind of COPD patient whether it will slow down exacerbations. Now, these are going to be very expensive drugs, and to date doesn't look very encouraging. Another one called mepolizumab. Hey.
It may be
mepolizumab. GlaxoSmithKline. Another, they call an IL-5 receptor antagonist, whatever the hell that is. My friend Steve Bernard involved in a study of CXCR2 antagonist. This is the Merck study, MK7123. Again, tried this drug, it didn't seem to work very well. They're trying, and then there's a whole bunch of these. A friend of mine published a paper, made a whole list of new kinds of classes of drugs that might, in fact, work, and frankly, there's not much progress to date. So if I encourage everybody, discourage everybody. Let me turn to COPD gene. You'll remember that we've been doing COPD gene since about 2007. It's a study trying to figure out why some people get COPD and some people don't. So we took a whole bunch of smokers who had smokers or ex-smokers who either had COPD or didn't have COPD. And the idea was to do a genetic analysis to find out why some people got it and some people didn't. And the punchline is that to do that, you had to study 10,000 people. So we actually did that. We recruited, in this study, 22 sites across the United States. Your tax dollars paid for this study. Collected 10,000 people. Half of them had COPD, half of them didn't have COPD. Did genetic analysis, did CT scans and lung function studies and stuff like that, and learned a lot from this study. And it says here, we at Harbor UCLA, 762 people. I think there's some people in the audience who were kind enough to participate. And we actually got funded to do a 5-year follow-up to find out what determines how fast COPD progresses in this 10,000 patient group. And the idea is to find new genes and new therapies, and 160 papers published so far. I mean, really a very, very productive, the best study I've ever been involved with. Wonderful group of investigators, and very, very productive. I just sent off a letter half an hour before I came here to support the phase 3 study. In other words, we're going to bring back people at 10 years, and if they fund it, and find out how they're doing, and again, what's going on. But I thought I'd just share with you just of 160 papers, one thing that I thought was interesting enough to bring to you. And it comes to the statement that I made initially. I can stress this, but the point is we have a sort of number in our head that if you have 100 people who have smoked over their lives, about 25%, maybe 30% of them will have COPD. The other 75% don't. So they're healthy. Well, we're re-examining that, and I'll show you the information. So you sort of feel, well, how come I was the unlucky one? Well, maybe it's not so bad. Is it really true that 75% of smokers escape the effects of smoking in the lung? Well, this paper was published about 3 or 4 months ago in Journal of American Medical Association, a pretty fancy journal, and there I am, except it's Richard H. Casaburi, and that's not my initial. I don't know how they got that, but there I am, Richard H. Casaburi, in the middle of that, in the middle of this very illustrious group of people. And the title of the paper is Clinical and Radiologic Disease in Smokers with Normal Spirometry, which sounds like a very boring thing, but the subheading that we wanted to put, the title we really wanted to put was the following: the myth of the healthy smoker. The myth that people can smoke and have no bad effects in terms of the lungs. So to do this, I told you we had 10,000 people. 8,000 of them were good for this analysis. About half of them had normal lung function by spirometry, that machine you blow into, say, you're okay, or you have COPD. Well, these are people who you blew in the machine, they could blow perfectly normally, and by definition, they did not have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. So we took those people and looked at those people who had normal spirometry and looked at them at their characteristics. And found the following, that these people who had normal spirometry, the doctors say, go home, you're fine. 13% of them had chronic bronchitis, that they had cough and sputum production. 4% of them had been hospitalized for a COPD exacerbation, a flare-up. Their quality of life was out of whack. A quarter of them had out of whack quality of life. They had shortness of breath that prevented them from doing things. They were 13%, even though their lung function was normal, were using medications, were using their inhalers. Who gave them those? I don't know who gave them those, but they were. And 26% If you looked at their CT scan, they were abnormal. A lot of them had holes in their lung. They had emphysema. It doesn't get picked up by the spirometry all the time, but they're not normal. And in fact, when we looked at it, the percent of people with CT scan abnormalities as a function of age, you got to be 70 or 75 years old, had about a 40% chance that your lungs really didn't look very good. And these are people who may have stopped smoking a long time ago, but here they are. So the myth of the healthy smoker, that half of these people had some manifestation of lung problems, and if you calculated it out to the population of the United States, there's about 35 million people in the United States who we say that they're normal, that they've got normal spirometry, that they've smoked. Well, they're not really so normal, and they really need some help. I thought that was interesting. The other interesting thing about the gene study is that their COPD is sort of a wastebasket term. It encompasses a lot of different conditions. Not everybody's the same, right, Jack? People are different. We're trying to make COPD a fairly large number of small diseases instead of one big disease. And this is one of the proposed ways of doing that by looking at the CT scans and saying phenotypes means different kinds. And that there's people who have airways disease. Their airways are bad, but they don't have holes in their lungs. Some people have mild holes in their lungs, some are moderate, some combined, some have nothing going on. And we're trying to look at these and find out whether the genetics of these people are different. And that will be interesting because eventually we may start describing therapies that are different for people who have different kinds of COPD. So that's where your tax dollars are buying you. And there's the title, and here's the here's the group at Harbor UCLA, and this guy with a really ugly tie standing in the middle. Come over and see us. Thanks so much. I probably take too long. Be glad for any questions you might have.
Richard, my doctor prescribed Advair and Spiriva for me, and she said it was for long-term mortality. Will this study negate that? Should I be having a little chat with her or him?
Well, first of all, Spiriva and Advair, my mom was on Spiriva and Advair because that was the Cadillac therapy for COPD. And the newer preparations might be a little bit better. But the statement that they make you live longer there's no data for it, I'm afraid. It's not that you shouldn't be on that, but I think you can tell your doctor to come and talk to me and have her show me the data that shows it prolongs life.
But it still might be good for my emphysema.
Oh, it is, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely good for your emphysema. It may not make you live longer. We have no data to show that.
What about anti-inflammatory supplements and diets to assist with the inflammation versus steroids?
Yeah. Well, you're getting a little bit beyond my expertise. As you can see, my diet's not all that good. Everybody should have a good diet. Good diets are good for you. Its specific effects on COPD inflammation are not well described. There are some dietary supplements that are being explored for various purposes in COPD, but nothing great. I think the best I can say is good diets are good for everybody and for COPD patients as well. Do you have anything specific, Dan, that you want to talk about?
Just they talk about an anti-inflammatory diet where you avoid certain foods.
I don't know enough to say anything about it. Please.
What about the combination of performance and albuterol and inhaler? How does that affect COPD?
Performist and albuterol. I'm trying to remember what performist is. I should know that.
Performance and budesonide.
Yes. Those are by nebulizer.
Right.
Correct. Well, nebulized drugs are fine. There's nothing wrong with them, except they're a little less convenient sometimes. Although the nebulizers are now getting to be smaller and they're getting to be more convenient. Frankly, this is my opinion only. the reason why people are using nebulizers are in part because there's a loophole in the Medicare regulations where you can get Part B to pay for nebulizers, but you can't get them to pay for spritzers. And that frankly makes no sense at all in any real sense, but there it is. Now, Performist and albuterol in nebulized are perfectly good bronchodilators. They're not really any better than the spritzers, but they're certainly no worse. So if your doctors prescribe those should do a good job for you. Please.
Is there any medicine specifically designed to help asthma patients?
Oh, there's many drugs designed to help asthma patients. In fact, there's probably more than there are for COPD. Asthma, first of all, responds very well to the inhaled steroids. And most asthmatics, that's all they need. And they essentially have normal lung function. They do very well. But for those who that doesn't work, you then add bronchodilators, the similar ones to the ones they use in COPD. And in fact, there are asthmatics who end up on Advair, a good drug. And just recently, tiotropium, Spiriva, has been approved for asthma. Different dosage, but those are, so bronchodilators are good. And then there's some other drugs for asthma that are coming along. Bepolizumab and mepolizumab, whatever I said, are being tried in asthma and are being more successful than they are in COPD. Wow. So there's a bunch of drugs that are good for asthma and several other classes that I haven't mentioned. So yes, there are good drugs for asthma.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
I take Advair for pulmonary fibrosis.
Interesting.
Any thoughts on that?
Well, Advair for pulmonary fibrosis. Pulmonary fibrosis, the major problem is not airways obstruction, and the bronchodilators sort of let the muscles in the airways relax so you get better airflow. So in general, for patients with pulmonary fibrosis, bronchodilators don't play a major role. I'm not really sure that inhaled steroids do either. There are, however, two newly approved drugs for pulmonary fibrosis. The very first ones are being approved for fibrosis. So those are causing some excitement. There may be a specific reason why your doctor's giving it to you. You may have an obstructive component as well as pulmonary fibrosis, and then that may make sense. And I never want to contradict somebody's doctor, especially when I don't know enough about what's going on. It's not a typical drug for pulmonary fibrosis, but there may be a good reason for it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. You're delightful. Thanks so much, Reza. Wait, one more.
Well, I'm a clown that brought you that magazine.
Oh yeah, yes, you're not a clown.
I encourage you about that. Do you foresee any improvement in their program in the quote-unquote near future?
Near-term stem cell trials. I've looked a couple of times to see whether drug companies or NIH were sponsoring stem cell studies in COPD, and I can't find that they are, which means that we're not very close to having what I would call an approved preparation of stem cells. So, and again, the initial enthusiasm for stem cells has cooled down a little bit. It's not that we don't think it's possible for them to help, we just can't figure out how to get them to do what we want them to do. So if I was to guess, I would say near term, probably not. And again, I don't want to say 100% that these people are not doing the right thing. They're just not doing it in the way that I consider to be the right way to get therapies introduced. Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry. You can have your magazine back. Have a great day, guys.